18 isn't a milestone when you're a ward of the state. It's an expiration date. One morning, you're a name in a file. By noon, you've legally ceased to exist. There were no candles for me, no cake, just a single cardboard box. It held 2 shirts, a worn book, and a manila envelope. 12 years of my life packed into something I could carry with one hand. I was bracing for the drop. I expected to become another invisible statistic. I believed my mother had abandoned me with nothing. I was about to find out how wrong I was. Mr. Henderson, the director, didn't look up. He slid that box across his desk with a weary indifference. To him, we weren't people. We were inventory. He'd watched dozens of us vanish into the world. "That's it, Leo," he said. His chair let out a sharp, metallic protest. "You're a free man." He handed over a check and my Social Security card. He tried to smile. It was a quick, tired twitch of the lips. The kind of humor that only lives under flickering fluorescent lights. I didn't smile back. My fingers just traced the rough edges of the box. For 12 years, my life was a clock. Breakfast at 7, school at 8, curfew at 9. Now, the page was blank. It was terrifying. Freedom felt less like an open door and more like being shoved off a cliff. "One more thing," he said. He pulled a white envelope from his wire basket. It looked wrong. It was too clean for this room, too expensive. "This came from a law firm." I took it. The paper was heavy and crisp. My name was typed in sharp black ink. Leo Vance. Below it was a name, Albright and Associates. I'd never heard of them. "What is it?" I asked. My voice felt thin, like a whisper. "No idea, mister," Henderson replied. He was already buried in the next file. "They said it was important. Something about the estate of Sarah Vance." That name hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Sarah Vance. My mother. She was a ghost made of fractured images. The smell of rain on hot asphalt. The low hum of a song. The scratch of a wool coat against my cheek. She vanished when I was 6. She left me to a system that traded love for paperwork. The official story was abandonment. The story I believed was that I wasn't worth the trouble. I spent my first night of freedom in a cheap highway motel. The television was bolted to the dresser. The air smelled of exhaust and old smoke. The roar of trucks outside was a constant, lonely vibration. I sat on the edge of a lumpy bed. I turned that envelope over and over. An estate. The words sounded like mansions and movies. It didn't fit the woman I remembered. My mother was a ghost who worked 2 jobs. She always seemed to be running from something. Finally, I tore it open. What sat inside didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a trap. The words were dense and cold. Testamentary disposition, fiduciary duties, intestate succession. But the core was simple. I was to report to the office of Ms. The bus ride to meet Eleanor Albright was a long exercise in self-deception. I spent every block downtown convincing myself that my mother's name on a legal document wouldn't change the hard reality of my life. The law office was housed in a glass tower that seemed to pierce the sky, a jagged monument of wealth that felt like a personal insult to the cracked linoleum and the smell of industrial cleaner I'd left behind at the group home. I stood there in my faded hoodie and worn jeans, feeling like a ghost in a machine built for people who had never known a day of hunger. The receptionist's eyes were a silent judgment, a mask of professionalism that couldn't hide her distaste for someone like me. but Eleanor Albright was cut from a different cloth. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a simple black dress that carried more authority than any suit. She gripped my hand with a firmness that felt like an anchor. She led me into an office that overlooked the city, a view so vast it felt like staring at a different planet. She began, her voice steady as she gestured to a chair. The words sounded foreign. My mother didn't have a lawyer. She had a life defined by absence. Toward the end, she reached out. "Yes," Eleanor added, her tone pragmatic, ignoring my confusion. She didn't sugarcoat the truth. She folded her hands on the polished wood and told me the estate wasn't a windfall. In her world, it was a liability. She pushed a file across the desk. I opened it and saw the remains of a life. It was a photograph of a house in Stone Creek, though house felt like a generous term. The windows were blinded by weathered plywood. The roof sagged, broken-backed like an old horse waiting for the end. The paint was curling into gray ribbons, showing the splintered wood beneath. It was a ruin buried in weeds and skeletal trees, a place that looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. "She owned a cottage," Eleanor explained. "It's out in a place called Stone Creek, about a 4-hour bus ride from here. She inherited it from her own grandmother. It's been in your family for generations." I stared at the decay in the pictures. This was my inheritance, a pile of rotting wood, a monument to neglect. It felt like one final insult from a woman who had left me with nothing but questions. "As I said, it's a liability," she continued, her voice pulling me back. "The property is in significant disrepair. More importantly, there are back taxes owed. 5 years' worth. It comes to $7,000. I felt a dry, bitter laugh catch in my throat. $7,000. I had exactly $312 to my name, the sum total of my state-provided severance from childhood. "I'm aware of your financial situation," she said, her expression softening with a look that might have been sympathy. "But lawyers like Eleanor Albright don't summon people like me just to deliver bad news. __quote _16__." She produced another document, stamped with the letterhead of a company called Oakwood Development. They were buying up land for a new resort project, and they wanted the dirt under my mother's rot. She turned the paper around for me to see. They were offering $25,000. __quote _17___, she explained. The $7,000 would be paid out of the sale. After her fees, I would walk away with roughly $18,000. $18,000. The number echoed in my head, loud and dizzying. It was a fortune. It was a security deposit on an apartment where nobody could tell me when to turn out the lights. It was new clothes. It was a bus ticket to anywhere. It was the answer to every terrified question that had been screaming in my head for the last 24 hours. It was the logical choice, the only choice. __quote _18___, Ms. Eleanor Albright said. 2 acres of dirt. Everything else gets leveled, erased. Part of me felt a cold, jagged satisfaction. Let them. Let them crush the last physical trace of her. She'd wiped herself out of my life long ago. Why shouldn't I finish the job? "The paperwork is ready," she said softly. She slid a pen and the contract toward me. The money would be in my hands within 7 days. I reached for the pen. My hand was trembling. This was my exit, my clean break. I could sign the paper, take the cash, and forget Sarah Vance ever existed. But my fingers stopped inches away. A stubborn thought surfaced in my mind. It was a quiet, heavy whisper. You shouldn't kill the past until you've seen it. You owe yourself one look at the ground she walked on. I want to see it first, I said. My own voice sounded like a stranger's. Albright's eyebrows shot up. She warned me the place was a wreck. She said the trip was long and pointless. I know, I said, my voice finally finding some weight, but I have to see it before I sign. She studied my face for a long time. Her sharp eyes were searching for something beneath the surface. Finally, she gave a slow nod. She pulled a drawer open. She handed me a tarnished brass key tied to a piece of faded red yarn. The bus to Stone Creek leaves at 8 a.m., she said. It only runs once a day. This was the only key. She wrote the address on a sticky note. I stared at her handwriting. I felt like I was walking into a trap. Be careful, Leo. Some places don't like to let go of the past. The bus ride was a long, rattling cage of noise. It was a tired machine groaning its way out of the city maze. I watched the skyscrapers shrink in the grimy window. They were replaced by strip malls, then flat, endless stretches of farmland. The other passengers were a collection of weary souls. An old woman with a bag of groceries, a young man in stained work clothes already asleep, a mother trying to soothe a restless child. I felt invisible, just another body in transit. I looked at my reflection in the glass. My face looked thin and pale. I had eyes that looked far older than 18. My whole life had been defined by what was missing. No father. A mother who walked away. I was a collection of absences. Now I was heading toward a derelict cabin, the final proof of her abandonment. Why was I even doing this? Logic told me to go back and take the money, but something primal kept me pinned to that vibrating seat. The landscape began to change. The flat fields turned into rolling hills and deep forests of oak. The sky grew wider. The bus wheezed up winding roads. The air through the window grew sharp and clean. 4 hours of staring at the highway blur ended with 2 words from the driver: Stone Creek. I stepped off the bus, clutching the straps of my single backpack, and felt like I had fallen back a century. The town was nothing more than a lonely crossroads. A single traffic light blinked a rhythmic amber, swaying in the wind. On one corner, a gas station stood with pumps that looked like relics. On the other, a general store with a sagging wooden porch and a Coca-Cola sign faded by decades of sun. A few houses clung to the edges of the woods. That was it. The air was sharp with the scent of wet pine and damp earth. It was so quiet I could hear the frantic buzz of a fly near my ear. I stepped into the general store to find my way. Behind the counter sat George, his face a map of hard winters and deep lines. He was hunched over a newspaper, peering through thick glasses. He looked up, his voice a low, gravelly rumble as he asked if he could help me. I pulled out the sticky note Ms. Eleanor Albright had given me and held it out. George squinted at the handwriting. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes, something old and sharp. "The Vance place," he murmured. "No one's asked about that in a long time. You family?" I told him I was her son. The words felt heavy and unnatural in my mouth. George's expression shifted instantly. He leaned forward, studying my face with a long, searching gaze. "Well, I'll be," he whispered. "You've got Sarah's eyes." He gave me the directions. 2 miles out of town, down a dirt track the county had stopped caring about years ago. He told me to watch for the potholes. The walk felt like an exile. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to a rutted path that was more weeds than road. The trees pressed in from both sides, their branches interlocking overhead to create a dark, suffocating tunnel of green. The silence was absolute. It was broken only by the crunch of my boots and the mocking caw of crows in the canopy. It felt like I was walking right off the edge of the known world. Then I saw it. The cottage was set back in the shadows, half swallowed by the encroaching forest. The photographs hadn't told the truth. They hadn't captured the profound, heavy loneliness that clung to the walls like ivy. The wood was silvered by age and rot. The porch tilted at a drunken angle toward the dirt. The plywood over the windows looked like blindfolds on a condemned man. It was exactly what Ms. Albright had warned me. A ruin. Nothing. I climbed the creaking porch steps, my feet sinking slightly into the soft, waterlogged timber. I pulled out the brass key and slid it into the lock. It fit, but it wouldn't turn. The damp air had swollen the door into its frame, sealing the house shut from the inside. I threw my shoulder against it, straining until my joints ached, but it wouldn't budge. It was a house that didn't want to be entered. Frustrated and sweating, I circled the building, pushing through thorny brush and waist-high weeds. I found a small side window where the wooden board looked loose. I wedged my fingers into the gap and pulled. The wood was soft and crumbling. I heaved with everything I had left, my muscles screaming in protest. With a long, agonizing screech of rusty nails, the board finally ripped free. I peered into the blackness within. The air that drifted out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of dust, decay, and secrets. I hauled myself up and scrambled through the narrow opening. I dropped onto the floor with a heavy thud, sending a cloud of dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light. I was standing in a small kitchen. A thick gray shroud of dust covered everything: the Formica table, the rusted sink, and a stove that looked like an antique. Above me, cobwebs hung from the ceiling like ghostly, tattered chandeliers. My movements were heavy, my boots muffled by layers of stagnant dust. Each room felt like a portrait of what happens when the world moves on. In the living room, a single armchair sat alone, its stuffing leaking from a jagged tear in the fabric. The bathroom was home to a tub mapped with deep rust stains. Finally, I reached the bedroom. It was the smallest space in the house. A simple iron bed frame stood against the wall, stripped of its mattress. A wooden dresser sat in the corner like a ghost. The air here felt different, thicker. This was her room. This was where she slept. This was the very heart of the loneliness. I brushed my hand across the dusty wood of the dresser. It felt like I was touching a headstone. I was ready to quit. I wanted to catch the next bus and leave this miserable place behind forever. But then, my boot caught on a piece of wood. I stopped. One floorboard near the bed was sitting high, just a fraction of an inch. It wasn't a trick of the light. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I dropped to my knees, joints popping in the heavy silence. I dug my nails into the gap and hauled it up. The board had been cut clean. It came away without a sound. Hidden in the dark, dusty space between the joists was a metal case. It was an old ammunition box, olive drab and solid. I hauled it out. The metal was biting and cold to the touch. I sat there on the floor, a single beam of light from the window hitting the lid. My hands shook as I fought the latch. It was stiff with years of rust. Then it gave way with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the empty house. I lifted the lid. There was no money inside, no jewels, nothing worth a cent to a pawn shop. Instead, I found letters, stacks and stacks of thin, yellowing paper tied together with faded twine. Right on top sat a single envelope. 2 words were written there in a looping, elegant hand. For Leo. My breath hitched in my throat. I reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page covered in that same script. My dearest Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means you are finally home. She wrote that she knew I'd have questions. She knew I probably carried a heart full of hate for her, but she told me that not a single hour had passed where she hadn't thought of me. Not a night went by where she didn't dream of my face. Leaving you was not abandonment, the letter said. It was a sacrifice. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I had to stop. The words were blurring behind tears I didn't even know I had. I wiped them away and forced myself back to the page. She told me my father had been a good man, but he made a devastating choice. He had borrowed money from a predator named Silas Thorne to start his business. When the business went under, the debt didn't die with my father. Thorne doesn't run a bank. He runs on terror. After my father passed, the debt became her burden. Thorne and his people came to the apartment. They didn't just threaten her, they talked about me. They knew my school. They knew the route I walked home. They knew every detail of my life. The air in that small room felt thick, like I was breathing in her original dread. She had gone to the police, but they were powerless. Thorne was too clever for them. There was no paper trail, no evidence. There was only his reputation and the fear he traded in. I knew I couldn't protect you if we stayed together. He would have used you to control me, to break me. So I did the only thing a desperate mother could do. I ran. I made myself vanish, and I made you vanish with me. I surrendered you to the system, knowing they would move you, change your name, and keep you hidden in a way I never could. I told myself it was like a witness protection program. It was the only way to sever the trail, to ensure Silas Thorne's people could never hunt you down. I came here, to your great-grandmother's cottage at 214 Stone Creek Road, a forgotten place for a forgotten woman. I boarded up the windows and lived like a ghost. I worked odd jobs for cash in the next town over, scraping together every cent. Every waking hour was spent thinking of you, writing to you, even though I knew those words would never reach your hands. This box, Leo, this box is my life. It is the record of the years we were robbed of. I need you to read them. I need you to understand. This house isn't a ruin. It's a stronghold. It was my sanctuary, and I pray to God it can be yours. Don't let them take it from you. It's the only thing I have left to give. It's everything. All my love forever. Mom. The letter slipped through my fingers. A sound tore out of my chest, a raw, jagged noise that was half sob, half scream. The story of my life, the one I had built around the central pillar of my mother's rejection, had just been dynamited. She hadn't walked away. She had hidden me. She hadn't abandoned me. She had saved me. The grief hit like a tidal wave. I cried for the 6-year-old boy sitting alone in a sterile government office, certain he was unlovable. I cried for the teenager who built walls of ice and anger to protect a heart he thought was worthless. And I cried for her. For the woman who spent her final days in this dusty, silent house, writing letters to a son she couldn't hold, all to keep him breathing. The weight of her love, a love I never knew existed, was heavy enough to crush my ribs. I sat there on the cold floor for hours as the light from the window bled away, leaving the room in deep, hollow shadows. The silence of the house had changed. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was reverent. It was the silence of a place that had guarded a painful, sacred secret for a lifetime. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a jarring, ugly intrusion from the world outside. Someone was still waiting for me to sign away her fortress. It was a text from Ms. Eleanor Albright. "Leo, just checking in. Have you had a chance to reconsider the offer? Oakwood is getting impatient." I stared at the glowing screen, the blue light illuminating the dust motes in the air. $18,000. The number felt repulsive now. It was blood money. They wanted to bulldoze this sanctuary, this monument to a mother's sacrifice, just to put up a golf course or a luxury spa. They wanted to erase her life for a profit margin. But the fear was still there, cold and sharp. $18,000 was a tangible exit. It was a path toward a normal life, away from tax liens, collapsing roofs, and the shadows of dangerous men. I was 18 years old, with no job, no future, and a few $100s to my name. What was I supposed to do? Stay here? Fight a man like Silas Thorne? It was madness. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the truth you uncover is so massive, so world-altering, that you don't know how to carry it. Where everything you thought you knew about your blood and your past turns out to be a lie. It feels like the ground beneath your boots has vanished into a void. If you're nodding your head right now, if this is hitting a nerve you've kept hidden, I want you to know you aren't alone. Subscribe to the channel and join us. Share your story in the comments. We are a community of people who have had to rebuild ourselves from the wreckage, and your story matters here. The people who find their way to this corner of the world, we share a specific kind of silence. Tell me in the comments if you have ever had to look at your own past and realize everything you knew was a lie. Because sitting there in that heavy darkness, the choice felt like a physical weight on my chest. One path led to a quick escape and a pocket full of blood money. The other led straight into the fire to find the truth. My answer was waiting in the letters. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust. I read them one by one, bundle by bundle. These were not just the words of a mother who missed her son. They were a chronicle. Sarah Vance had documented the quiet terror and the constant watching. But she had also found her strength. She had not just been hiding. She had been hunting him back. In a letter dated 2 years after she left me, she wrote, "Leo, I have started to follow him. I am digging through old newspapers and public records. Thorne is not just a loan shark. He is the ghost behind the real estate. He uses threats to force families into shell companies he controls. Companies like Oakwood Development. He is a vulture picking at the bones of this town." My blood ran cold. Oakwood Development. The very company trying to buy this land. It was not a coincidence. They were not just developers. They were him. They were still hunting her even after she was gone. They wanted to finish the job and take the one thing she had managed to hold on to. Another letter, written just 1 year before she died, gave me the final piece. My love, I think I found a weakness. Your great-grandfather was a clever man. He built secrets into this house with his own hands. There is a loose stone in the fireplace hearth behind the old wood stove. I am putting everything there. All the evidence I found. It might be enough. If you are reading this, it is for you to decide. And there is something else there, too. A little seed money for the taxes. For a start. For our home. I scrambled to the living room. An ancient pot-bellied wood stove stood like a sentry in front of the stone fireplace. I knelt in the ash, running my hands over the rough hearthstones. My heart hammered against my ribs. One stone on the left shifted under my touch. I pried at it with my fingers. It was bone-heavy, but it lifted out. It revealed a dark, hollowed-out space. Inside was a small wooden box. I pulled it out and clicked the latch. The contents were exactly as she described. A small black ledger book. I opened it to find names, dates, and amounts. It was a meticulous record of the victims and the properties Silas Thorne had stolen. There were photographs of him meeting with men I did not recognize. There were 6 old cassette tapes labeled with dates, and beneath it all, a thick brown envelope sealed with wax. I broke the seal. Inside were stacks of 20s and 50s bound with rubber bands. I did not count it. I did not have to. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that it would be enough. Tucked into the stack was one final note. Be brave, my Leo. Your love is my legacy. That was it. The decision was no longer a decision. It was a calling, a duty. I was not going to run. I was not going to sell. This broken-down cottage was not just an inheritance. It was my mother's story. It was her fight. And now, it was mine. I took out my phone. My hands were steady now. First, I called Ms. Eleanor Albright. The clock was past midnight when Eleanor Albright picked up on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, edged with a professional's concern. She asked if I was all right. I told her everything was different now. My own voice sounded foreign to my ears, deeper, more grounded, like I finally had some weight to me. I told her the sale was off. I was paying the back taxes. I told her the wire would hit the county office tomorrow morning. A heavy silence stretched across the line. Eleanor asked if I was certain. She wanted to know what had shifted my path. I kept it simple. I told her I found the things my mother left for me. I told her this was the only right way forward. I asked her to handle the legal wall and tell Oakwood the deal was dead. I could almost hear her reevaluating the man I was becoming. Finally, she spoke, and there was a note of respect I hadn't earned until that moment. She told me she would take care of it. Then she warned me to be careful. She said people like that don't take no for an answer. I told her I knew. Then I hung up. Next, I pulled the Oakwood development number from their own letterhead. A man with a voice like polished silk answered. I asked for Mr. Davies. When he confirmed it was him, I gave him my name. I told him that regarding the property at 214 Stone Creek Road, I was rejecting his offer. The slickness vanished instantly. His tone turned into a cold, hard edge. He called me a kid. He told me I was making a grave mistake. He claimed the house was a worthless ruin and their offer was pure charity. I didn't flinch. I told him it wasn't for sale. His voice dropped an octave, laced with a quiet, vibrating menace. He told me that land had a complicated history. He said it was more trouble than it was worth. He told me to take the money and walk away while I still could. It wasn't advice, it was a threat. I thanked him for the tip and cut the line. That first act of defiance sent a surge of adrenaline through my chest. It was a terrifying mix of fear and absolute power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a victim of what had happened to me. I was the architect of what happened next. The following morning, I hiked the 2 miles back into town. I wired the $7,000 to the county tax office from the general store. George, the owner, watched me count out the cash with wide, silent eyes. He noted I was settling my mother's debts. He gave a slow, solemn nod. He told me Sarah Vance was a quiet woman who kept to herself, but she had a spine made of steel. He said it was good to see she'd passed it down to me. That small bit of validation from a stranger felt like a medal pinned to my chest. I bought a crowbar, a hammer, and enough cleaning supplies to drown the neglect. For the next week, I worked from the first light of dawn until the sun fell away. I started with the windows, ripping the boards off one by one. The sound of dry wood splintering was the most satisfying thing I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a cage breaking. When I pried the last board from the great living room window, the sunlight hit. It flooded the space for the first time in over a decade, turning the floating dust into a galaxy of tiny stars. It felt like a resurrection. The physical labor was a balm for everything that was broken inside me. I scrubbed the floors. I patched the holes in the walls. I tore the choked weeds from the earth with my bare hands. With every swing of the hammer, I felt like I was clearing away the sorrow. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was rebuilding my own soul. The locals started to take notice of the change. George from the store drove out one afternoon. He brought a box of fresh vegetables from his garden. An older woman from down the road appeared one morning, holding a warm loaf of bread. No questions were asked. No pity was offered. Just a silent acknowledgement that I belonged here. Bit by bit, these small gestures were stitching me into the fabric of the community. I was no longer a ghost in the trees. One night, after the sun had dipped low, I sat on the porch I'd spent all day hammering back together. I reached into a crate of my mother's belongings and pulled out a battered cassette player. I slid a tape inside. Static filled the air first. Then I heard her. It wasn't the voice I had spent a lifetime imagining. It was real. It was clear. Sarah Vance sounded exhausted, but she didn't sound broken. The recording caught her mid-sentence, facing down one of the men Silas Thorne had sent to intimidate her. She didn't flinch. Her defiance was a physical weight in the room. Hearing that steel in her tone changed something inside me. This wasn't a solitary struggle anymore. This was a family legacy. The weeks bled into months. The ruin at 214 Stone Creek Road began to transform. It was still scarred. It was still humble. But it was no longer a corpse. The roof held. The pipes hummed. I even cleared the dirt where the letters said she once tried to grow tomatoes. The house was finally drawing breath. For the first time, so was I. I watched the sun sink behind the pines, the air turning sharp and clean. I thought about the word inheritance. For people like us, that word usually feels like a cruel joke. We think of bank accounts or deeds. I was wrong. My inheritance wasn't the wood or the soil. It was the truth. It was the realization that my mother's love was a shield. It was a fierce, quiet power she'd hidden here until I was strong enough to carry it. They told me I was left with nothing. They were wrong. She left me a reason to stand. She gave me the backbone of a fighter. The war isn't over. Not yet. I handed the ledger and the tapes to Ms. Eleanor Albright. She's moving now. She's talking to authorities who can no longer look away. Silas Thorne is still a shadow over this valley. Oakwood Development is still waiting. But I'm done running. I'm standing my ground on my land, in my home. So many of us carry stories that aren't ours. We are told we were abandoned. We are told we were never good enough. But what if those stories are lies? What if there is a secret buried under the wreckage of your past? A story of a sacrifice so heavy it had to look like a betrayal. My journey started with a rusted key to a broken house. It ended with the truth of my own life. It taught me that home isn't a gift you are given. It's a fortress you build with your own two hands. You defend it. You make it yours. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own truth or reclaim your own home, I hope you'll join our community. Subscribe to the channel and share your own journey in the comments. I read every single one. Every story of survival deserves to be heard. You are not alone. My name is Leo Vance. I am Sarah's son, and I am finally